might as well use it at the end. The second version two, that's very light. So, just say, look,
Yeah, there you go.
we're very good at saving money. No, we had two strip lights in each one.
We'll start. I was in a B&Q, and all the lights down all the aisles have got sensors on them. So if you're standing there kind of trying to find something, the lights all go off. Quite strange. And it's like you get people doing this. Right, and on that note, welcome to this meeting of the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Just from Bassett Allen.
Okay. Bassett. So Moses, you're subbing for Dave? And then you said Vishal's running late. That's fine. Right, okay, thanks for that. So item 2 is to approve as the minutes of the meeting of the 8th of September. Are there any errors or issues to raise? If not, can we accept those? Okay. Any items, item 3, extra, any declarations of interest in any item on the agenda tonight? No. Take the next 3 together. Do we have any questions from the public, town and parish councils or councillors? No. Right. On to the first substantive item on the agenda this evening, which is the medium-term financial plan for 2026-2029. Stephen, are you going to introduce this?
I think I'm going to introduce the item and then hand over to others. Every year, there's an element of uncertainty, especially at this stage in the process, about the extent of our government funding. This year, that element of uncertainty is much, much greater. As you will, I think, all know by now, we've been campaigning to persuade the government to moderate its proposed reduction in revenue support for Woking Council. And just to remind everyone, if the government does not change its position, the council is set to lose what could easily be as much as £50 million of funding over the next 3 years. We decided that rather than yell from the sidelines about the unfairness of what the government's proposing, it would be most productive to engage with ministers and try to convince them that their proposals, if they weren't changed, would cause great damage, not just to Wokingham, but a whole swathe of councils across England. That damage will obviously affect the ability of councils to pay for services to the detriment of residents. But it will also mean that the government will find itself obliged to spend a lot of money propping up councils pushed into an unsustainable position by ministers' own funding cuts. We continue to work through council networks to find allies and campaign together. We're represented on the South East strategic leaders. In fact, Wokingham currently chairs that group. And that body sent a letter to government making the case for a rethink by ministers. Our MPs, Clive Jones and Ewan Yang, have been helpful in presenting our ask to fellow MPs and ministers, and they continued their behind-the-scenes work on our behalf. And we will continue to lobby the government directly. We recently used the Labour Party conference as an opening to approach ministers and discuss with them the challenges that we and many other councils face. The recent resignation of the Deputy Prime Minister, who was also the Secretary of State responsible for local government, led, as you all know, to a ministerial reshuffle. One of the casualties of that process was the local government minister, Jim McMahon, who had actually been engaging with us. And I'm actually, on a personal note, very sorry he's no longer in office. However, the new Secretary of State, I think, offers us some hope of a sympathetic hearing at that level of government. You'll know that the new Secretary of State is Steve Reed. Steve Reed was the leader of a London council before he became an MP, and I think we can reasonably confidently say that he knows the challenges of local government at first hand. And it's worth perhaps adding that many of the London councils are in a similar position to Wokingham and will face a significant reduction in funding if the government does not change course. We've already corresponded with the new Secretary of State, setting out the logic behind our request for a 4% floor in the annual increase in core spending power. And a core spending power, as I think you probably all know, is the total amount of revenue available to councils, government grant, retained business rates and council tax. And if we are successful in persuading the government to introduce a floor, and even more successful at persuading them to introduce it at 4%, that should go some way towards preventing those councils already under pressure from requiring emergency funding from government. And a similar letter, I should add, has recently been sent to the new local government minister, Alison McGovern. Now, while Wokingham is in a stronger financial position than most of the potential losers under the government's proposals, even Wokingham will be forced into some deeply unpalatable decisions if ministers refuse to modify their approach. Now, the precise scale of the challenge, as I've already indicated, really is still unclear. There are a lot of moving parts. And obviously, if we are successful in our lobbying efforts, we hope the gap between where we are now and where we could be will be narrowed. But it remains the case that there's going to be a big challenge, almost regardless of how successful we are. And that the extent of the challenge, as far as we're able to assess it at this point, is clear in your papers, I think. There's an indication of what we believe it will be. It needs to have a lot of caveats attached. Smoke but don't inhale, I suppose, is the point, because things will and could and will change, I think. But the purpose of bringing this to you this evening is really to welcome your views and invite your views on how we might best bridge the gap between where we are now and where we might have to be given the worst case scenario. So I think that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to Susan, I think, first of all.
Right. Thanks very much, Stephen. So on the point of the big challenge that Stephen mentioned, I think it's worth us talking about the action that we've taken to date. I just want to check the presentation is on the screen. Maybe it's not on the screen. No, okay. Okay, so it's on, if I sort of go to your, it's in your pack. It's on, just check on the pages.
I was trying to do it, I think.
Well, I'll go to, so page number. So it'll be page 16. So that's where I'm just going to sort of refer to some of the points. Yeah. So, so Stephen's talked about the challenge. So in terms of how we've responded previously, I thought that would be a good point to start. So over the past 3 years, we've made as a council more than £30 million of savings. So that's been as a result of a myriad of actions, because I think it's worth mentioning these because these are the type of things that we'll need to do more of in the future. So, for example, we focused on demand management. Adult services have done a real sort of root and branch look around sort of demand management, and they've done a lot of service remodelling as a result. We've also changed contracts and services, and we're doing process reconfiguration. So BPR is part of what we're looking at, and highways, for example, is part of that. In the past, we've also and we obviously do right now, partnership working is really important to us. So we work a lot with the voluntary sector and around sort of tackling poverty, for example, because that actually is important in the sphere of prevention. And in the recent CQC inspection, the CQC said our partnerships were excellent, and that, again, that's really important in terms of early intervention and prevention. And in terms of what we've done previously, it's really important we benchmark and we learn from others. At the same time, as I've mentioned previously, the Empower Productivity Index, which looked at spend against outcomes, actually we measured really well. So 5th best in the country. So that gives us an indicator that actually in terms of what we spend versus what we achieve in terms of outcomes, we do measure well, but at the same time we do want to learn as well. I think that in the past and now it's really important to absolutely focus on residents, focus on our communities, focus on outcomes. And in terms of this challenge that we've got right now is to avoid a knee-jerk reaction or major service cuts, or as it says here, a whole-scale staff reorganisation. I don't think that's a good message. It doesn't, and it's not the right thing to do. And in terms of what it says here, potentially, and again, Graham will talk further about this, you know, we're looking at an additional £21 million per annum by 28-29. So what we would look to do is to continue with the type of things we've done already and really push on that innovation point and really change and challenge to meet the scale of the financial pressure, whatever that is. And still, it's depending on the impact of the settlement, we absolutely would not want to minimise impact on residents and communities, because that's why our staff and colleagues are here. You know, we want to make a difference for our communities. So that's why the innovation is really important. And I want to say avoid a knee-jerk reaction, because anything in terms of making savings, it's really important to understand the impact of what we're doing, to understand the cumulative impact of different savings, and to be clear and caution against any unintended consequences. So if I go on to the next slide, it'll be the next page on your pack. So in there, we talk about I'm just going myself to my next page. The requirements that we have to, and discretionary and statutory services that we have to deliver as a council. So as it says here, 80% of our spend is on the things that we must do. For example, around safeguarding, around homelessness, around education, waste collection, planning, and roads maintenance. You know, there's so much that we have to do, and our commitments are listed there in terms of the council plan, which of course you know very much, and we're not going to move away from those commitments in whatever the financial challenges in the future. And just to really finish off here, the 5 sort of circles on your next page, our guiding principles, are really what's going to be really important as we move forward. So we've really took on the mantle of the challenge in the past years, and now we want to continue with the guiding principles in the future. So that is to reiterate, in terms of our people, you know, are our greatest asset. At the same time, it's really important to understand and know what our teams are delivering. So, you know, be clear on teams, be clear on what's being delivered, so we really know ourselves. And at the same time, for me, it's knowing our communities really well as well, because that fits with prevention and, you know, intervening early, and so knowing our people. The second circle here is about opportunity to thrive, and that obviously fits with what we've got in the council plan, what we've got in the community's vision. And so we want communities to thrive. And again, this is where prevention is really important, and actually investing in prevention, because that prevents longer term issues which inevitably can cost more. And the third circle is value for money. So we look outside at different opportunities and look at new ways of working and commercial opportunities. I think about different ways that we've sought to save money. So for example, we've bought 2 care homes for older people. We've got care homes for children and young people, you know, those we've got a responsibility for. And what we're seeking to do is have our people and young people in our borough and actually provide the care that's needed, but it's at a lower cost as well. So we're actually doing something different. It costs less, but still getting better outcomes. So that's where the sort of value for money point comes in. And I think as a general point, as we move forward, again, it's having that real clarity on return on investment, that value for money piece. And then the two final points that I want to focus on as we move forward, we build on those partnerships that we've got. So we've got a lot of partnerships, we continue to build on them. And that co-production is really important because, again, that helps in terms of prevention. And are you going to go, right? Okay. And prevention, so the final circle is around prevention. So what I talk about here is what we need to continue with is that prevention and early intervention, because as I've said, that actually helps in the longer term and better outcomes for our communities, because ultimately that's what we're here for. And then at the same time, it's about looking at demand management in general, right across the council. So we've been doing that. We've been doing a lot of work on demand management. I mentioned about adults, but it's doing more and more of that as well. So I think there are two different aspects to this whole sort of like demand point. So if I hand over to Graham, unless...
Just before we do, Pauline, you had a question.
Thank you for that. Page 18, actually, there was a couple of things that I was wondering if they were missing. So, completely agree with what you've put down here.
Yep.
The two things that I think could be missing out of this is focusing on lean operation and dealing with failure demand. I've had reasons to have a conversation with an officer today who's looking at automation and things. I've had the same conversation with officers for the last 6 years, and it appears that I'm still having the same conversation and the message has not been passed on. And I've also got a few examples of things where issues that residents have had and been going on for multiple years. And I think that's inefficient. It's not good for the resident. It's not good for dealing with the issue. And it's also not efficient in terms of the costs that the council's incurring. So I think looking at trying to make our processes leaner and quicker and more effective is something that seems to be missing from this. And I think looking to avoid duplication as well. There's quite a lot of smokestacks in the organisation still. So you find where you're dealing with issues which cover more than one organisation, you quite often find that, or more than one bit of the organisation, you quite often find that the two pieces don't work together very well. So I think there's something about business process re-engineering, and I'm not trying to rip the whole organisation apart, but I think you've missed an opportunity there, possibly.
In terms of your point about business process re-engineering, I think I mentioned at the intro that's something that we have been doing and will continue to do. So it's missing off this guiding principle, because our change team absolutely are focusing on BPR, because we're working with the different teams to look at where we can take out unnecessary processes. Not saying we haven't covered everything by any means, so it's about absolutely we must focus on that. And then when I was talking about prevention here, I mentioned about demand management in general. And when I am talking about that, I do mean the very thing that you're talking about as well in terms of that failure demand, because you're absolutely right. I mean, it's frustrating for residents, absolutely, and we really need to reduce that. So absolutely, yes.
And I think the final frustration for me was having provided the same examples and problems at least 4 times in the last 3 years. Nothing's happened. So we're still discussing it rather than anything having moved forward. And I think because each time it's different people and there's no link between them, so you end up having the same conversation with a different consultant every year or so. And I can give you more examples, but it's the principle of the thing, not the specific example. It's the waste that's caused by lack of coordination, I think. And I think that's an opportunity to save some money anyway.
Yeah.
Indeed it is, and I think that's very helpful. Thank you, Pauline. I would just want to add that in terms of corporate working, better corporate working, so different parts of the council are owning a problem or a challenge, all owning it rather than just saying it's someone else's responsibility. We have, I think, made quite significant progress in the right direction on that. There are some really good examples of cross-departmental, cross-directoral projects that have eventually led us to a solution that is going to save us quite a bit of money. So I think there's always more to do, but I think we have started on that journey.
I think the issue is when several examples where somebody's done something and then not either told the resident or told the councillor or not told either. And I've had that happen 3 or 4 times in the last year. And each time then there's a whole load of chasing. The resident's not happy. And actually something has been done. It's just not been communicated. And I think I've sent you examples of that in the past where it's sat in people's, I don't know, outboxes or something, but never been sent. So I think there's something we need to do about making sure the end-to-end closure happens as well.
I'm sure we can try and do what we can on that.
Graham, welcome.
Just before I hand over to Imogen to do the rest of the paperwork, I just wanted to come in on the failure demand, digitisation, what have you. We have got a major programme of work called the Productivity Programme, because that's quite a faddish word, productivity. And in there, we look at our people to have the right people in the right place, processes to make sure they're as lean and efficient as possible, and technology, which of course enables those much slicker processes. So I guess just to give further reassurance to Pauline that the productivity agenda with the PP&T are very much at the heart of the council's working going forward. Imogen, over to you.
Thank you, Graham. Okay. Basically, my view on this is, I mean, we cannot assume that the campaigns will change anything. So everything we look at on terms of our budget, we do have to, look at it with a view that our situation may not change. But the campaigning that Stephen is doing here, it's welcome, and hopefully it will change something. But we can't proceed with assuming that it will change. So we basically have to, tonight, obviously, we've got a high-level introduction, which is where the scrutiny of our budget needs to begin. And it's certain things like, obviously, national insurance increases, national living wage increases, and the wider economic issues that are going on are affecting us all, and all of our local business, not just the council. And obviously, council tax is capped at 2.99%. So we need to make sensible decisions about what's happening with our budget. And we also are going to get a look at the earmark reserve this evening. So we need to understand what these are and what the reasonable levels of these should be, and ask questions as to why the levels are set as they are. So your views are welcome, because it will take the support of all of our councils to make perhaps some difficult decisions on this budget and to make it work for all our residents. And this is where we begin. Obviously, going on from here, there will be the different departments will come and bring their different areas, will bring their budgets in more detail, but this is where we are. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Imogen. So if I can first bring your attention to page 20, which is the timetable of the process that Imogen touched upon there. So tonight we have the strategic review or overview. Then on the 4th of November, we'll have place and growth, revenue and capital. On the 25th of November, we'll have adult social care and children's services, revenue and capital. 16th of December, resources and assets, again, revenue and capital. And then on the 21st, I intend to use that as the final mop-up that takes into account all the moving external factors, but also the issues you raised, and introduce those where appropriate, or explain why they haven't been introduced. Important to recognise that it is the detail. There'll be the detailed budget submissions that will come on the 4th, 25th of November and 16th of December. So I urge you to read the paperwork as soon as it comes out with the agenda. So obviously you can make sure you got the right questions in on the night. So page 20 is important for the roadmap going forward. I'll introduce some of the other strategic contexts and their time frame and how they sit in that timetable in a minute. So page 22, bullet point 1 is relevant right now. And actually, although you haven't heard, you wouldn't have heard of so many Section 114 notices recently, you would have heard quite a few in terms of exceptional financial support. And it's the exceptional financial support that prevents the council issuing a Section 114 notice. So the pressure is there. Councils are falling over. It's just they're going straight to EFS as opposed to 114 notices. If they didn't get the EFS, they would be in 114. The fairer funding review obviously has been spoken about a lot. Stephen's talked about it. I'll just introduce its time frame and what's important there. So in the context of page 20, the timetable, we will be receiving the government's response to the local authorities' consultation response in early to mid-November, which means I may have the opportunity to tell you what that means on the 16th of December. The reason I won't be able to tell you right away is because it won't have a number that's issued. It'll have an awful lot of policy statements and proposals, and then they need to be worked through in terms of what they possibly mean for Woking Borough Council. So I'd endeavour to bring those to the 16th with an update. Again, I do stress that will not be the figure for two reasons. One is a calculation, a best possible calculation of one with caveats. And secondly, it's not the final position. The final position will arrive just before Christmas, which is always nice. And we will, so that will be the first, it'll be the draft local government finance settlement just before Christmas, which means I'll be able to bring that back on the 21st. It will still be draft and it will get confirmed in February. There's usually very little change between the draft and the final. So moving back to the strategic external factors, bullet point 2, 3, you would know. Bullet point 4 is that, yes, inflation is still a big issue and has actually gone up in recent months, and the cost of living impact remains and also shows itself on income lines as well as expenditure lines. Page 23 is really important because adults and children's services together make up about 70% of local government, Woking Borough Council's finances. So negative swings here are usually very profound. So, for example, national living wage increase, every 2% increase is 1% on the council tax. That is huge. Homeschool transport pressures contain obviously the SEND issue. I'll come to that a bit later, but the SEND issue also creates more pressure in homeschool transport. We've got staffing. We've talked about demand. Susan was referenced. Demand management, early intervention prevention. That applies across the council and applies to failure demand as well, as discussed. But the numbers here are so much bigger. If we really get on top of this, this is an absolutely critical area to succeed in. Adult social care placements, children's services placements, SEND costs, they are huge, and one or even sometimes more, a family, for example, with challenges can make a millions of pounds difference on their own in terms of the council's finances. The adult social care market remains fragile, and Imogen talked about national insurance. That will add pressure to an already fragile market. I think the other points, health pay increase, lack of care leaver accommodation. Obviously, these are all, lack of care leaver accommodation is something we really are looking to attend to in best way we can. And you'll see more recently we have made some inroads there, and indeed our housing companies have been part of that solution. But the pipeline of demand is very severe. And then we've got the white paper, which is the white paper on the schools the schools white paper, which includes the approach to SEND, is expected in November. So there's a slide on DSG, so I won't say any more on that. On place, page 24, this represents some of the risks that we put down last year, and we also reference HRA, which falls under place. I'm conscious Pauline's got a hand up. I'll run to the end of my bit and then we'll take questions. So HRA is an important account to keep balanced, and it's under a lot of pressure, and its rental income stream is determined by rental guidelines. So not to lose sight of that in the round, but it's not, we don't bring the HRA here for scrutiny in the same way. DSG is another component of the whole medium-term financial plan. And bullet point 3 is the deficit is forecast to increase by, to £56.9 million, which is pretty alarming, but obviously sits in the national context of many billions of pounds across the country. The statutory override expires March 28, but that gives us little consolation when we think of the costs of interest associated with that deficit. It falls on the council taxpayer and already costs the council taxpayer millions of pounds per annum, money that would otherwise be available for our other statutory services. I also can't ignore it from a balance sheet perspective, because there's no certainty beyond March 28 that it won't fall onto balance sheet, because it's determined to be off balance sheet at the moment. In my role as medium to long-term financial planning, I can't ignore it. So it's really important we get clarity on that. I did mention the schools white paper, particularly with regard to SEND, will be out in November. That paper will give us some information. The actual proposed solution to the SEND understood to be broken system will is supposed to come out at the same time as the local government finance settlement. So that would be just before Christmas. Sorry, Cara, can you flick us on to DSG? That's where I'm at, thanks. So that penultimate bullet point was the interest rate that I talked about, and the final bullet point was the point that we won't know where we stand with regards to DSG until just before Christmas and the draft local government finance settlement release, which isn't great. And obviously, but more importantly, it's what that proposed solution is. It's not great in terms of timing, is what I was referring to. Then page 26, we move to the pressures, external factors around capital. And those points that are listed are similar to the ones we listed last year. Page 27, Susan talked about our approach to savings over previous years, and you'll see that the level of savings required from 23-24 have been substantial, to say the least. And with 23-24 and 24-25 being pretty much double or more than double some of the previous years, each of those years being double. And then the graph to the right-hand side shows the accumulated MTFP savings amounting to 35% of the budget since 2019-20. Page 29, you've seen this before, and this is just ticked along by 1 year. It's the accumulating savings on staffing from 2023 to 27. Obviously, it's always an area of attention because staffing is a serious expenditure line. But of course, staff are rather essential to delivering good quality services as well. But we have made considerable inroads from the base of 23-24, and we will continue to be as efficient and effective and as appropriately organised in this area as possible. But the accumulation since 2023 is 9%. The accumulated savings is 9% of the workforce at that time. Page 31 is in many ways the most important page. Just over the page, Cara, that's it. Page 31. This shows a little bit of the audit trail. This is all updated for 26-27, all the growth in savings. So you'll see the overall position, net position for 26-27 is 3 million. Then the kind of the strategic items fall below, showing that we would have had a funding challenge of 26-27 of £5 million, which is almost half of that we initially said when we went to overview and scrutiny back in February. So quite a lot of work, good work has gone on to take down a £9 million challenge down to 5. However, you'll see the lines below the 159 million pounds show the impact, the potential impact of the fairer funding as presented several months back. I must stress, as Stephen did, that one thing is certain is these figures will change, and obviously we hope they move in a much more favourable way for us. But just to stress all those caveats, but looking at that impact, with our best knowledge of where they stand right now, they would move the 5 million challenge in year 1 to 11 million, and then the 5 million challenge in year 2 to 20 million, and then the 5 million challenge in year 3, this is cumulative, to 26 million, which, if you look at the line 5159, 5544, 5095, labelled budget gap pre-FERA funding, if you consider that 3.3 million of that first £5 million was brought forward from this year, this is quite incredible. We've effectively balanced within £2 million, consumed our own smoke, whatever the terminology, over the 3-year period. Close, well, within £2 million. Then you add back this year's residual challenge, £3 million, get you to the 5, and then you bring in the FERA funding potential impact, and you move to a £26 million. So a budget presentation in detail that you'll see that effectively shows a balanced budget over the whole of 3 years, and I have never seen that before. It's really remarkable. Unfortunately, because of those factors, turns into a £26 million shortfall. Yes.
I mean, it's
galling.
It's staggering when you look at the work that's gone in over the past few years to get to that position, and all of the excellent work that's been put in by all of the officers, to then have to sit there and face, just a decision based on formulas that pushes us that far out is staggering. I mean, it's unprecedented in all the 20 or so years, 20 plus years I've been doing this. I've never seen such a unbelievable change on a flip of a coin or the top of a pin, just to go from the effectively balanced to that simply because of the external pressures applied by government. I mean, it's staggering, absolutely staggering. And we've all been through Gershon and everything else over the course of our careers, and austerity and everything else from previous times, but this is just unparalleled. So, do you want to pause to take questions before you move to the next section? I'm sure there'll be quite a few that will come from this bit, or do you want to keep going?
Just going to do another 3 slides, okay? Okay, well, I'll get to capital. Page 32 is special items. That's it. Over to Chris.
All right then. Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got one question, one possible suggestion, and then another way of presenting information that might help everybody. So the question was about the exceptional finance support. How does that actually work? Because that's allowing people to spend more than the increase without a referendum, is that correct? So what they're essentially doing is although they insist if you've got an increase of more than the 2.99% plus the adult social care increase, you have a referendum, they're letting people off it. Is that what's going on?
So I'll take them in order. Okay, one at a time, because you've only given me one. Okay, so, right.
I'll give you the rest now if you like.
Right, exceptional financial support can take there's 2 ways that the government can provide exceptional financial support. And one is by permitting a council tax increase in excess of the cap. And the other is to allow the council to borrow often a very significant sum. And then that borrowing has to be repaid over 10 years. So that's a significant, what's called MRP, minimum revenue provision. And the interest on that, of course, hits the revenue account. So it's by no means a get out of jail card. It has a very, very significant impact on the revenue account in terms of paying off the debt through revenue and the interest rate as well. And across Berkshire, some have received exceptional financial support and two have received ability to increase council tax. And two have had the ability to do both, increase council tax above cap and receive exceptional financial support. So it's a dual package under supporting councils in financial distress.
I was just trying to understand what was going on there, because it appears that nobody's going for the referendum because that would be very expensive. It's just a way of avoiding it. So the suggestion, I've been in situations like this before in industry, and I'm just wondering, have you written to your suppliers? I've done that in the past, explained the unprecedented nature of the cuts. In our parlance, it would be unprecedented disappearance of revenue, and ask them to share the pain. Because suppliers always get inflationary sort of increases, or quite often get inflationary sort of increases, and I think they've got a profit margin built in, which we should be able to be taking a share of. So what we've done in the past is the chief executive's written to every significant supplier and said, this is our pain. Essentially, we're in risk of going out of business in your terms. You've done well out of us over the years. Is there any chance you'll share some of the pain? And sometimes you get quite a good response, because people want to build a long-term relationship with you. So the question off the back of that is, what percentage of your expenditure is with third parties? Do you know?
Probably easiest to answer your first bit, which is it's a good idea, and we have done it before, but that's no reason to not do it again. So I'll take that away. I can't recall great successes, but I'm not saying that there weren't.
I think we've got a better story this time.
Yes, it's more compelling, more compelling. Yes. So on that, and then the question on suppliers, what percentage of the council's budget? Well, if you think that an awful lot of adults and children's is commissioned, and quite a lot of place, I would say between 30 and 40% must be bought in. I was going to say, don't quote me on that. It's a public meeting, but what I should say is I'll confirm that. But I would have thought it's in that
I'm surprised
region.
it isn't more than that, actually, to be honest.
Well, I'm just thinking.
Highways is largely bought in.
Well, yes, I'm thinking of staffing. I'm thinking of assets. It might be more. Might be.
If I'd been asked to guess, I would have said more like 60%, but I do not know either.
Okay. So. I'll just raise mine to 40% then,
I know a lot less
and
than
I'll
you do
come
about
back and confirm. But it will be a very substantial part of the overall budget.
So I think that might be worth trying. And then the final thing, you're talking about savings, but of course there's also inflation built into these things. So it's not an actual saving; it's a balancing saving against increases. So it would be interesting, I think, to see what the cost is per head of population or per household, I don't really mind which, of providing services per year, so we can see how it's changed. Because what you've done in these figures, as far as I can understand, and I'm not criticising it, I think it's the way it's always been done, is you've put some growth in and then you've tried to rake it back by saving money, and that's good. But the question is, at the end of it, has the cost still increased, and if so, by how much? Per head, because per head's important, or per household, because you can't provide the same service to more people at the same price. Generally, some things you can, but not many. Generally, number of households is the driver of cost to a significant extent, if not all of it.
Okay.
So you understand what I want?
I believe so. So we're looking at page 27, and page 27 sets out the gross savings position. And those of you that have been gone through this process before will realise that we show gross expenditure growth. Cool. So expenditure growth as a gross, and then we show the savings. So, for example, if adult social care, we know that there's going to be an extra 20 people coming through in demand, but then we're going to take a measure, an intervention that reduces that by 3, we would show, can't remember what I said, did I say 20? We show the full 20 as the expenditure pressure, and then we show the 3. So there's complete transparency of this is what it'd be, but then this is the saving by doing something different.
So page 31 shows it, I think, well. Where you've got
So,
approved growth savings
Yeah.
net.
yes, you're right, absolutely right. So, and that's how we set out our MTFP process, and it's good practice to show the growth position. But Pauline's right, of course. I've added up all the savings over the years, so I'm looking at the line on the page 31 that comes down to £7.5 million in year 1. But there's another dynamic to, or as a counter to that, which is, well, we have to put growth in and we have to put inflation in. So yes, of course, for sure, our net budget goes up every year because our growth and inflation is bigger than the savings. So what I believe, Pauline, you're asking me to do is effectively look at the net budgets over the previous years and divide them by the population so you can see what the cost per head of population is over the years, which will then take into account the net position of growth, inflation minus savings.
Yes, that's it, exactly. So I think that gives you a proper view of efficiency. So, you know, your inflation might be running at 3%, might be running at 10%, don't know what, depends on the year. But your costs may be increasing by 4% or 2% or 15% or 8% or whatever, and it gives per head. And
Yes.
that gives you a view of your actual delivery of efficiency.
Yeah, well, yeah, yes and no. I understand it gives you the full picture with all the components that I said. However, in the growth position, much of it is unavoidable because it's statutory demand-led and inflation. So it requires us to be efficient to bring the savings in, but it's an almost impossible task, I would say, to year on year come up with savings that are going to address the huge increase in statutory demand and inflation.
Possibly. I'd just like to see what the picture is.
I think that, and Graham's obviously answered the question, but something I was thinking about was, again, that Empower Productivity Index, because that absolutely measures how much we spend versus the outcomes we achieve, and it's outcomes across a whole host of indicators. So that does, that you know, that's part of the picture of actually indicating that where we are in terms of value for money, which is where some of the, you know, where some of this, what this is about. And that's something that we can maybe draw on as well. I'm not saying it's the whole picture, but it's just something that helps.
I think they're all
articulate
valid views of the picture. I think the actual savings is a valid view. I think the Empower survey is a valid view because it's about what you're delivering, not just about how much it costs.
Exactly right. Yeah,
But also I think the actual cost per head or per household, I don't mind which, would be another interesting thing to see how much we're increasing. And part of the reason for increasing the cost of services is increasing scope as well, because we keep getting asked to do things that we didn't do previously. So it's to inform, not to criticise.
Yeah, and I thank you. It's very much welcome, your contribution, Pauline. And as you rightly say, you can look at this from lots of different angles. You can conceptualise it, the challenge, in lots of different ways. But there is one thing in common, that we're under financial pressure.
I don't deny that for a minute.
Great. Oh, Moses, so sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not a regular member of this committee, but I like to make sense of numbers. I'm struggling to understand how growth almost doubles within a year from 3,475 to 5695, and then it's almost 76 something. The same page 31. I don't know how you get the growth calculation, but it just seems not too bad. How do we get growth more than doubled in just 2 years for the same line item?
These are cumulative figures. So, yeah, so if you take adult social care, it's 3,475 in year one, and then it's plus 2.2 million in year two. I can only say with cumulative and non-cumulative, all I can say is over my quite a number of years' experience is some people like them one way, some people like them the other. And so sometimes I show them in both ways, and then people say they've received too many numbers and can't make sense of it. So I understand. I understand the challenge. So whatever way, I appreciate if people don't understand it, and that's why I'm here, obviously, to explain.
I understand when it's cumulative, just in a separate committee last year, I was told that it's not cumulative. So it makes sense to me that it's cumulative.
Okay, we do show them in both ways in different. I guess just try to look out for cumulative and not cumulative, especially when you see the bids. I think they might be shown in a non-cumulative way, and probably both ways, to be honest. Yes, I'll take that away and make sure that happens.
And keeping it consistent from one committee to the other.
Well, this whole page is cumulative. Oh, yes, sorry. So I was up to page 33 with the capital summary. Remember, this is revenue and capital. Revenue often gets a lot of close scrutiny because that feeds directly into the council tax calculation. But capital is also extremely important, both in terms of its impact on the overall council's finances, but these are often the most visible schemes out there in the community, or the most visible work out there in the community. This shows a reasonably healthy position in that, as it stands, the schemes you will be presented with show that they are almost affordable over a 3-year period. So if you look at the cumulative funding surplus/gap, which is the very bottom figure, it means we're 4.6 million short of being able to fund all 3 years in terms of the bids we intend to present, which is extremely positive. I've seen gaps over 3 years in the 20 plus million region. So to be at 4.6 is, I think, is a testament to the work gone in to try to cut our cloth accordingly to the cloth we have. I'll stop there. I'll stop there before I move to the budget engagement piece. And Pauline's got a question.
I think someone needs to buy Graham a book of analogies. Pauline.
I was just idly wondering what assumption you'd made in terms of population increase over this period.
Oh, right. Okay. Tax base. So, right. If you look at page 31, if you go to the budget gap pre-fairer funding impact and move 2 lines up, if you look at the brackets, it tells you in each of the next 3 years.
Thank you. Sorry. How does that match with our huge housing target?
Well, it's the next 3 years, don't forget. And the submitted local plan takes advantage of the transitional arrangements, which is a lower target than the one we will get in the future.
But still, 1% with that massive housing target doesn't sound like a lot.
Well, you have to remember that houses take time to get built. They don't get built all at the same time. They will be phased in over the time. The market will obviously determine to some extent the pace of delivery of those houses. And then those houses on completion have to be occupied and people have to start paying council tax, but they also have to start generating demand for services.
But it was ever thus. We're currently building out last time's plan. There's lots of that isn't built.
Yeah.
So is 1% realistic given the amount of houses being built in this area is an open question.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's our best estimate of what we think is likely to happen.
I guess the flip side of that, though, is if, for the basis of, I was going to say prudent, but not for the basis of sensible planning, 1% is probably a sensible number to plan from. Because if we came to 2, 3, I'm plucking a number. If you came to 3% and it's only 1%, then we've increased our problem in future years by over-egging the pudding.
No, I'm trying to get it right. I'm not trying to over-egg the pudding.
No.
We are currently 170,000 people,
No, nearly 180,000.
nearly 180,000. So, you know, assuming 2.5 people a house, that, you know, it seems to work out about right, I would say.
Well, I think our challenge is that it's about the rate of build and the rate of occupation, and those are fluid and uncertain. So I think the 1% is a very reasonable estimate.
So it's 720 houses a year, I think. Yeah, okay, that may
Yeah,
be.
and I think that's a realistic expectation in terms of build out, although
Okay.
the figures are 748.
Well, just to say that our estimate is based on a statutory tax-based calculation, and we've looked at the trends and put what we think is reasonable in there. And there is a huge lag between the local plan and a house being built and being occupied and paying council tax. There was a very, very long lead in time. The other aspect is if this is too low, then of course we can put an extra percentage in, but we will have additional residents adding extra pressures onto services. So
I wasn't for the minute suggesting that this would give you more money. I was worried about the impact on services, not the impact on revenue.
well, and what I'm saying is there's both sides to that equation. If it's wrong, it'll be wrong. Correct.
Thank you, I'm relieved about that.
Keep going.
Okay, so now we're moving to page 35, the budget engagement summary. Page 36 and 37 lays out how much work went into trying to engage with not just the community, but quite an eclectic mix of representation across the community. And that went on for a long time, quite early on in the year through to not long ago. However, although a huge amount of effort was undertaken, and it was a good thing to do, it is worth recognising that the total respondents was 1,275, and we've just talked about a population of about 180,000. So it's hard to get people too excited about a broad budget engagement. It certainly would be more captivating if it was about a single issue that affected people on a daily basis. That's tangible and people will respond to that. But it's really hard to get a broad set of principles or approaches get a response. However, we did a lot better than previous years. A lot of work went into it. And then the outcomes of that, in summary, are set out from pages 39 through to 42. Those may or may not surprise you. Obviously, you can read yourself what the public said, or the 1,275 of the public said. And I suppose it's at this point for you to note the outcome of what was a very extensive piece of work, but also to consider the questions asked in the survey in the context of what Stephen said at the beginning when he made his introduction, and indeed Imogen referenced, is this budget is potentially challenging to levels we couldn't even imagine before. So the importance of us working together and coming up with solutions, proposals, possibilities is a vital part of it this year more than any other year. And I guess it's in that context, I'll hand back to you, Mark, or Chairman.
Thank you. Not for tonight, but I think when we've looked at consultations over several meetings over the last year or so, I would be interested when you say there's more this year than previous years. It would be interesting to see if there's any more. I'd like to see whether we've made an improvement year on year in any of the groups that we found particularly hard to reach or hard to engage with last year. I don't need an answer tonight, but for another meeting, it would be good to get that broken down by age group, perhaps.
I'll give a kind of provisional answer because we need to know more. But I think what the thing that struck me as different about this year is we made strenuous efforts to reach those difficult to reach groups and the people who often are not well represented in our survey results. So it went beyond what we've done normally. Now, it may not have produced a staggeringly large number of respondents, but it's probably produced a more representative sample than we've managed to get before. That's just a preliminary view on the basis of what I can see.
Useful. It would be good to get more once that's broken down, just to get more, because I think it is important that we don't just hear one voice. Vishal, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question. So for young people, it mentions that the Youth Council was contacted for feedback. Were any schools in the borough contacted, especially like maybe the older years of any school potentially?
But the Youth Council is made up of school-age children, and they are all elected from their own schools, and they are meant to go back to their schools and consult on the things that we consult them on. So they are, in a sense, kind of delegates that come to us, give their views, but then report back. So I think we're capturing through the Youth Council the views of a wider section of young people. But they are, of course, the Youth Council is necessarily people who are keen to participate. They're not necessarily the hard-to-reach groups that we're after. The Youth Council is typically those children who are academically gifted and are really want to engage anyway. They have political views, they have priorities. Our challenge is reaching those who are more reticent and more reluctant to engage with a council or anybody that's viewed as an authority. So we've been trying to work hard on that, but your point about youth council and schools is a really important one. Thank you.
So, yeah, I know people are generally bad at responding to surveys, but would you think 1,000 responses out of about population about 170,000 is statistically significant to form a decision?
I'm pretty sure it's not. And that's not the purpose of this, to say the public have spoken and determined A, B or C. What this is saying, we have made great endeavours to seek the views of the community in the way set out, and this is what we've found. So it's just one component of, well, A, for you to know that the survey's happened is important, B, what it said, and C, to consider appropriately in your roles as councillor and this budget setting process. And I stress appropriately. It's so yes, it's not intended to be a statistically sound response to you. It's just saying this is what we did and this is what we found.
I think, as we said before when this has come up, I think that the trouble is if you want to get a statistically significant survey done across the entire borough, well, but if you're trying to get a statistically significant response rate on a survey of this with all these questions, and the only thing you can, I mean, we've in another place we had a panel we established, which cost an absolute fortune because you have to pay someone that will do all of the legwork to get the 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 representative surveys completed and then discard half the results because they don't fit. You've got too many in one group. So I hear you, and I think we all agree. The trouble is that we've done. I think I've seen this survey out more often, more wider, and certainly seen more residents talking about it than we did in previous years, which is good. I think getting the youth councils, getting those more involved is good. It's one of the reasons I asked for more of that breakdown. I mean, you can't force people to give the survey. As you say, the ultimate referendum, I guess, or the ultimate feedback is an election time, but not still going to get the answers back to the questions that you're asking. Stephen.
Just to note that we have this conversation every time any kind of survey comes up about its statistical validity and about how many people we've reached, how representative it truly is. And these are all very legitimate questions. And Graham has, I think, given the appropriate answer. But it may be worth letting you know that we are in the process of developing a consultation strategy and about how we may improve on the way we consult, and we will no doubt want to share that with you and get your views on it as that policy or that strategy is developed. But we are acutely aware that this is an area of challenge.
I think for every council it's the same. Pauline, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've got one question and one slightly flippant comment. So page 40 and page 41, no, not page 40, page 39, no, not page 39, page 41 and page 42, they've got the same heading as far as I can see. Have I missed something? Is it one of these things we have to pick the thing that's missing off a tray? I've got the same heading, but they've got completely different content, and I don't understand. I don't understand what the two different selections are and why they ended up with completely different lists.
Without making a flippant comment back, do you mean ranking discretionary council spending, those two slides?
Oh, yeah, but
I'm just trying to, you changed a couple of different page numbers. I was just trying to work out which, I was trying to play catch up in the day.
yeah. It's about the ranking discretionary council spending based on more than 1,000 responses. Both slides have the same heading, but they've got completely different lists and both start at 1. So what are they actually? Or am I misunderstanding something? Have I missed something? See what I mean? Is one last year's picture and one's this year's, or the content's different, but the headings are the same.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, do you want me to speak? Yeah, I think it's because there were 4 questions and there's 4 responses set out here, so that's correct. And what we tried to do in the survey, if you go to the original survey, or if you indeed completed it, we tried to create 2 kind of lenses. So this was looking at discretionary services, this was a certain type of cluster, maybe more kind of people-centric, and the other one was more of a place-centric. So we're trying to create kind of, rather than lump everything together, is to try to find lump them into theme type things. And the survey, when you go to the full survey, makes a bit more sense than what I've just explained, but we did deliberately create two categories to look at and consider.
Thank you. I filled in the survey so long ago, I can't remember, to be honest. Yeah, okay. Yeah, one's service related and one's sort of, well, I'm not sure. What the other one is.
One's more people and one's more place. So one's more the people in the community and the other one's more of the place things. Broadly.
So the slightly flippant comment I was going to make, which is only slightly flippant, if we have this discussion every year about how we get a low response rate and how we can't actually take any meaningful information out of these surveys, how much did it cost, and would it be a thing we could reduce the cost of or save? I know that you're statutorily required to consult, so I know you have to consult on some things, but if you're consistently getting meaningless results because the sample is too small and a small sample, how much does it cost, and is it worth it? What is it going to change?
Well, maybe this is the point for me to just remind you of what I said about a consultation strategy being worked on and coming out, which you'll have the chance to comment on in due course. I think that may be the mechanism by which we address some of these issues.
Yeah, because I'm interested in consulting, but if we're consistently having conversations about whether we can actually draw any conclusions out of it, then something's wrong. So I welcome that, and I also am quite happy if we don't consult on everything. I don't think we need to. And
I think it's not meaningless, but it could become more meaningful. I think that's what you're looking for. Yeah.
we just said it hasn't got enough of a sample to be statistically significant. I mean, looking at the list, I'm not surprised the order things have been put in, to be honest, having talked to a lot of people, so it may well be right and it may have some meaning. But if it had said something that was completely counterintuitive to what we think, then would we have believed it? Answer, probably not.
I think it's one of those ones where we will need to pull consultation process and the whole consultation strategy apart when it comes through scrutiny. I have no idea when it's due to come to us. I can't remember seeing it on the work programme, but I think, you know, we keep talking about this. I think it needs to have a proper airing and a proper discussion.
And I'm looking at this through the lens of a £50 million problem, by the way.
If it's any consolation, we started work on this, or I encouraged that work should be started on this before we face that £50 million challenge, but that makes it even more pertinent.
Oh, sorry, Caroline.
Thank you. On page 40, I thought it was very good that communities want to support each other by volunteering. Are we going to explore this more? Because they said they'd like to help support services by volunteering and bridging the gap. So are we going to explore this angle to help?
I'm sure we are, Caroline. We've already been doing a lot to encourage volunteering. In fact, I was today at the AGM of the Working and Volunteer Centre, which is about encouraging volunteering, and clearly working with our voluntary and charitable sector partners is going to be very, very important in the future. It's already very, very important, but it's not going to get less important. It's going to get more important.
Any more? I guess the obvious one, you know, we've talked about that, you know, we're not in a position of Section 114, and we're not in a position of wanting or needing for the EFS route, unlike some other councils. We are capped at the 2.99%, just around the room. I know we've said it in different ways and times. Are we of the viewpoint, Catherine, I'll come to you in a sec, you know, are we all of the agreement that actually we don't want to go down beyond a 2.99 for a referendum? I mean, are we looking what's the view of the room on going above? I'm not advocating for a moment that we should, and I don't think any council that's ever gone for a referendum increasing of 2.99 has ever passed it, but I just wanted to double check that my thinking is right, that that's what we're all saying.
I certainly wasn't disagreeing with that. I mean, I
No,
don't think,
I didn't think you were. I just want to make sure that we're all of that view, that quite clearly the referendum route and going above the 2.99 would be a
well, you know
waste
the
of
answer you're
money.
going to get
Well,
in
it's
a
a waste of money.
referendum, even though people say they want to pay more. When they actually,
And
get
it
asked
is-
to pay more, they don't.
And that's what kind of prompted the conversation, because you look
And,
at...
you know, a lot of people out there are also suffering with pressures of inflation and all sorts of
Absolutely.
things. It's not the time for us to dip our hands in their pockets. Absolutely not.
I 100% agree, and I'm not. I ask it for the question of just wanting to be all very clear that we all have that same view around the table. I certainly would not advocate going for a referendum which would cost a vast amount of money and would ultimately fail.
Of course, it's not my decision, but that's my view.
Views around the table to the leader of the council. Catherine?
Yeah, I'm not a great numbers or finance person, but the numbers look huge to me. And I'm just wondering whether we can actually survive this enormous funding gap.
Well, maybe I should give the political response, and then Graham can add anything he wants in terms of the technical financial response. But politically, there's absolutely no doubt this is a really big challenge. And the word unprecedented gets used a great deal, but if it ever it were appropriate, it's appropriate now. But the things that give me confidence that we will get through this really difficult and challenging 3 years ahead is, first, we have a council that has been financially very well run over many years. Graham has, as we're going to see in a few minutes, got a level of reserves for this council, earmarked reserves, that would be the envy of most councils. So we are in a stronger position in that regard. We have incredibly impressive officers, not just in the finance team, but throughout the council, who now are incredibly inured to the task of having to make significant savings. And the quantity of savings we've made over the last few years is really eye-watering, really. Just looking on that table on, I'm trying to remember which page it is. Yes, savings, the last 6 years, page 27. But 2 years in a row, between 11 and 12 million pounds of savings. That's absolutely phenomenal. To have got to the position where we have, that if we hadn't got this extra challenge of the fairer funding too coming our way, we would be looking in a remarkably strong position. And all of those should be causes for confidence that we can get through. And come back to the point that Caroline was raising a minute ago about the relationship with the voluntary and charitable sector. Another great strength, besides our financial strength, the quality of our officers who, across the council, I'm absolutely full of admiration for the work they do. They're very committed to the public service. But there's also our community. It's a strong community. We've got a voluntary and charitable sector that's really active and involved and is engaged with the council and working in partnership with it on lots of levels. We've got businesses that do take seriously their social responsibility and are keen to help. And we have, I think, a relationship with bodies like the University of Reading. We're incredibly lucky to have the University of Reading available with its research expertise available to us because of our strategic partnership with the university. So I think there are some positives there that, in my mind, need to be set against the scale of the challenge. And those positives make me feel that we will get through. It's not going to be easy, but we will get through.
Thank you.
And on that comment, I think we'll move on to the next section, but just wanted to thank you for the detail on this. I know there's a lot of work in progress as we get through this. Obviously, we'll move on to the reserve section in a minute, but I think my comment I would make as we go through the next few meetings to the members of the committee, is to make sure that as the papers come out, that if a substitute is needed for a meeting, the paperwork goes out a week before. It's a chance to raise any questions as well if you want to clarify anything before a meeting or any other point. We're going to be extending invites to the other committees, as we said before, to ensure that we have other voices here from the other parts of the scrutiny committee as well. It's going to be some long meetings coming up, as you'll see from the work programme, which is the amended paper you'll have in front of you as well later on. We've cleared off as much as we can from the work programme, or thought we've moved out from things from the work programme for the next few meetings to make sure that we have absolutely sufficient time to be able to go through all of the budget for each section. That being said, there's going to be an awful lot to get through in the next couple of meetings, more so than last year, given the scale of the challenge. I'd like to thank Graham and everybody else for the work they're going to be doing. Stephen, and then we'll move on.
I should have said in my response to Catherine, one additional point that I should have mentioned but forgot. And how could I forget it? Because this process is part of what I wanted to say, which is really, besides the quality of our officers, the strength of our community, the strength of our financial position, we have a lot of councillors of all parties with a lot of experience and knowledge that we, I hope, can call on through this process of engaging with overview and scrutiny. And we genuinely welcome your suggestions and ideas. Obviously, some of them may be more workable than others, but we would like you to come forward with suggestions, even if they turn out not to be workable. It's better to have suggestions than not have them. So I think if we can continue in that spirit throughout this whole process, it will be very constructive, and we all collectively will be doing a great service to our residents. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Sorry, Graham, did you have a comment?
Yeah, sorry, just following on from Stephen. So this survey was intended to do two things. One is let you know what happened and what the response was, but the other thing was to stimulate your own thinking in terms of what you think the solutions might be. As it stands, the only plan I have is to represent these pages as we move through the services, place and growth, etc. But if you think there's something else that would help with your thinking and stimulate solutions, suggestions, either in here or outside of here, then please let me know.
Thank you. Right, in which case we will move on to reserves. Next item. Graham, back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. We have a report set out. The cover sheet is page 43 to 45 in terms of the introduction, and then goes all the way through to 50 odd, 56. Well,
it's a good job you don't. It's a good job you don't do numbers and finance and counting, Graham. 50 odd.
Still 50 odd. And it sets out, like it did last year. This is the third year you've received a report like this. It sets out the types of reserves that we have, why they're held, the importance of various aspects of the reserves' impacts on cash management and borrowing, which is really important, not leaving the council exposed to going to external borrowing whenever we incur expenditure. Talks about the impact of the fairer funding reforms, which is a massively significant issue. Shows us on page 50. There's some nice little pretty pictures that show generally Wokingham in a healthy place if you look at the debt and reserves graph on page 50, so this is us against comparators. And these tables and graphs have been updated from previous years. We had a load of off-log intelligence and graphics that we've now replaced because they're no longer updated. So we've put some new sources in there. And we've introduced a graph that shows the, although it doesn't pinpoint Wokingham, the narrative explains where Wokingham would sit in some of those graphs, most probably alarmingly being the percentage that our DSG would take up as our overall reserves. So that gives you context. Then page 52 through to 56 sets out every single reserve with the balance estimated at March 26, some other explanatory around risks, and then the change from the last ONS. The significant changes are explained on page 57, which includes business rates, interest and debt repayment, town centre regen, forward funding, children's services. The summary position of the reserve is in total, but I must stress the total can be very misleading. Shows on page 56 the total being 78 million, now reduced to 65 million. That obviously includes the impact of the DSG. I think that's probably sufficient. So I suppose what I would say, the two papers clearly do talk to each other. There's reference to obviously the size of the gap. And we talked about reserves will be a consideration in helping us manage whatever challenge we have. Reserves can only be used once, but if they're used sensibly, then they can be critical in getting out of very challenging circumstances. And when I say used sensibly, that would be in early intervention, prevention, investor save, investor contain. That's all really good stuff. And the income or the cost containment will be much higher than the cost of investing in the activity. The other thing is to be able to buy a bit of time to make sensible choices around what we do and make sure that we don't or minimize the chance of unintended consequences and quite often detrimental financial impacts further on down the road. And it's probably fair to say that authorities in section 114 are forced to make poor business decisions because they have to make it here and now. And actually, in terms of the medium term and longer term, they are the wrong things to be doing. Of course, a lot of that sits in the world of early intervention and prevention. Demand management, for example, things we talked about here. I'll stop because I'm sure you'll want to be grilling me about the detail on this paper. I will just end by saying the really important thing is the strategic position here and the overall quantum, and not taking considerations in isolation. So in terms of being able to write to the council and say we have a safe level of reserves, that's not a figure. It's a consideration in around taking into account risks and context and what have you. And one of the most unhelpful contexts is the continued uncertainty around the DSG deficit. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you. And as you say, I think there's a lot of councils around the country would look upon this paper and these figures with maybe envy is possibly a bit strong, but certainly with envious eyes. I think it does further show the kind of the excellent financial management that residents have benefited from over the years. And I think the reserves position shows that as a very good example of it. The trouble with some of the reserves is when you present them in the public or when people see them in the public, it's perhaps the narrative about what actually the reserves actually are, and it's not always real actual money in the bank, or spendable or usable reserves. The one question I had, I did have, and it seems not the most significant of ones in the grand scheme of things because it relates to 2031 with the end of our current PFI contract on waste. And I've just lost my page. It references a figure. If someone can help me, just tell me what page I was just on. Thank you. It references a figure in here. I'm now trying to get back to it. As our share of an unknown. I think there's a lot of things that we don't yet know because obviously we've not started looking in full detail at the contract, but with dilapidations, etc. I'm waffling. It says waste PFI contract ends 2031, risk as costs unknown, contract arrangements unknown. Fair enough. We know that's where we are. WBC have no land asset, circa 15 to 20 million estimated. So that's our share of costs that we're likely to maybe have to find, or a percentage of it. I guess my question is the reserve is at 2.69 million. It's grown the reserve at 12%. We got to get to 2031. Is that a problem? Yeah, what I'm just trying to do is get to a point of going, are we going to get to 2031 and suddenly find ourselves with a large bill? How do we work out how do we fund our 15 to 20 million estimated share of the cost, or will most of that roll forward? Do we build that into future contracts? Or I think I'm looking for a nod of assurance that that's not the biggest problem that it looks like on paper with the gap between 2.7 million and 15 to 20 million. You can come back to me in the relevant section.
Yep. So in response to that, so we're talking about page 52, the Waste Equalisation Fund that currently shows a forecast balance of 2.7 million. And that fund was used to some extent, but was to be repaid. So that will increase as that loan is repaid, taking it back to where it was. The initial purpose of this Waste Equalisation Fund, we didn't have a fund at all as we went into RE3. So even if we have 2.7 million, it's 2.7 million more than we had last time. But it was actually set up then to deal with the peaks and troughs, particularly through mobilisation and the origins of the RE3 work, which created lots of very lumpy expenditure that I sought to smooth out by creating this fund, and it went into considerable deficit, knowing that it would come back round over time. Although, of course, you're right to reference the new contract because that's what's written in the exposure, but that wasn't the purpose of it. So the fact that it's just in surplus is a testament to it served its purpose. However, it could be used to help us to some extent with preparedness for a new contract. I suspect, and if you think of this is actually how RE3, the PFI works, I'm not suggesting we will be a PFI, but the capital costs, whether it's PFI or not, can be revenuised, if there's such a word. And I suggest that's what would happen going forward. However, if we do have a little nest egg to help us with the design, formulation, expression, the legwork that goes into creating a new contract and even taking a chip off of some of the capital costs, then that's great. But I don't see it as a concern that we wouldn't have anything. Like I said, we didn't last time, and this would be a bonus in effect.
Thank you. That was kind of the answer I was hoping for, but no, it's fine. I remember most councils were also in the same position 20-something years ago. None of us had reserves for the massive kind of lumpy exposure over the first couple of years of that mobilisation. So it was a question just more, are we planning? Any other questions on reserves? Caroline?
No, Pauline.
Oh, Pauline first.
I just wonder if you'd like to tell us a bit more about the interest and debt repayment reserve. Page 36, bottom. I think, oh no, actually, no, sorry, pardon me, page 53, top.
Yeah, it is very sizable, but the variations also can be very sizable. I think one of the big, I know we have a separate town centre regeneration reserve, but that's 3 million in the context of a debt position of 89 million. That holds a sizable amount of risks, as does the overall treasury management portfolio. So I wouldn't rule it out in terms of a place where we could increase risk, but I think we need to do a review of all of our capital risks, because we are quite have been capital risky, or should I say ambitious, with our delivery of, in our capital ambition, we've got town centre regeneration, we've got the strategic development locations, we've got the housing companies. All of this leaves us with a very high debt exposure. Our debt exposure is, and if you look on the graph, we are just about in the average, but the wrong end of just about. So we do hold a lot of risk and exposure in this area, but certainly something we could review.
So our capital, my recollection is our debt is reducing from the figures last time, and yet this reserve is increasing. Now, I've not got a problem with reserves increasing, by the way, but I just thought it was maybe slightly counterintuitive. And I thought the capital borrowings were generally PWLB, and aren't they fixed rate?
Right, debt's increasing just because of DSG, for example.
That's not capital, is it?
Yeah, we have to borrow to fund DSG. It's, where does it come from?
Okay, so I thought I'd seen a debt graph in the MTFP last year showing debt decreasing. Is that a different sort of debt? Or am I imagining things?
I'd need to look at that graph, because I'd have to look at that graph.
I'll find it for you.
But what I would say is, yes, interest costs are fixed, but we have all sorts of debt maturity points, and therefore a fixed debt becomes time expired, and then we're exposed to the market. We are actually facing a very high level of exposure to the market over the coming years, and a lot of that is created through the escalating DSG deficit. So our cash reserves, I'm sure it will be in that report, our cash reserves are becoming smaller and smaller, which means we've taken out a lot of the buffer in terms of exposure to the market, which will expose us to much higher rates than we have enjoyed in terms of our fixing in the past.
So when you started off explaining this, you talked about town centre debt and all that sort of stuff, but actually what you're saying is the big elephant in the room is DSG, not town centre. Is that fair?
Well,
because I thought we were paying off the town centre debt.
Well, I'd say right now, town centre, because if you look at town centre regen, the debt position at 31,325 is £89 million, which is higher than the DSG. But in 2 years' time, correct.
DSG is certainly the biggest problem. It's a much bigger problem than.
Yeah, because it's out of control. It's the problem with that, rather than being paid off.
It's not
And
just
it's
us.
not generating money either, which
no.
the town centre is.
It's not just us, it's like every council.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's anything to do with us. I'm just saying that the difference between the town centre and the DSG is the town centre is a known figure that is being paid off using the revenue from the town centre gradually, and has got a fixed interest rate, whilst the DSG is out of control. It's increasing. We haven't really got a handle on it. We've got very little influence over it, and we've got to pay the interest. So it's quite a different situation.
On that point about interest, Pauline, alongside all the other lobbying we're doing of government, an important lobbying campaign is about trying to persuade the government, obviously, to try and address this problem of DSG in a radical way. But if they are not prepared to address it in a radical way and they shy away from that, at least try and treat the interest on this debt in the same way as they treat the debt itself, which is off our books. And if that could happen, we would then be spared this increasing pressure on our revenue budget.
So being off our books is all very well, but we still have to find the cash. So how does that work, Graham?
If the statutory override's in place, technically we don't, but obviously there's a great uncertainty about the statutory override.
But if we've got to pay money, if we've got to borrow money to furnish that demand in the DSG, the money's got to come from somewhere. It either comes from council tax or borrowing. If it comes from borrowing, you've got to find the cash to pay the interest, unless somebody else is going to pay you for it, regardless of whether it's on the books or not.
Okay, this is how it will work, Pauline. So, say we have £100 million worth of deficit, and all of that, and we had no cash reserves. So we have to go and borrow from PWLB at, say, 5% to fund it. And the cost of that borrowing from PWLB will get charged to the DSG deficit. So the DSG deficit now becomes 105 million.
So you're spending money you haven't got.
Well, you're putting it on, you're borrowing, but you're charging the cost of the borrowing to the same deficit, so the deficit goes up at a quicker rate.
But you've still got to find the money to pay the interest, haven't you? Where does it come from?
It gets charged, it's borrowing. So you borrow from PWLB, will give us £5 million. So we got now £5 million, but that £5 million is accounted for by adding £5 million cost to the DSG deficit. You can see it's not a very sustainable solution.
And so
but
that 105 billion.
I was a
105,
million.
105.
You've gone up much quicker.
100 squiddlies. That 105 million, then to service the debt becomes 109, 110 million, because you're borrowing effectively more from the PW, Public Works Loan Board, to then service the debt because it's off. So you end up just, I'm trying to think, it's like equity release, but it's not. But it is that you don't eventually at some point.
Everything goes bang.
I mean, this exposes the utter folly of 10, 20 years of government policy and it's been failed to be dealt with by anyone. But now we're in a position where we've only got the 3 years left. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of it, whether it'll continue. Every council's, I mean, I when I saw the graph of the predicted 3-point-something billion of national deficit, I was surprised actually it's not higher. And I know it's going to accelerate. And I know there's some councils around in the southeast of England that have truly eye-watering amounts of money compared to us.
A legacy of a long-term failure to deal with SEND provision.
Long-term.
It's terrible.
And so I think it's just going to, the ideal would be for it not to have to account for that on book, because then we're not having to at least service the debt. But then,
The ideal solution is to sort the problem out.
but the ideal solution is we need to sort the problem out. And at the moment, well, the whole country is printing money and it's writing checks that, at some point it's going to come crashing down.
Well,
Yes.
I think the radical solution is to try and address the root cause of the problem, which is the legislation of 2014, which created this problem. And until that is addressed, everything else is really just tinkering. I'm
Quite
afraid.
agree with you. Yeah. Could I ask one other question?
Sorry, can I just, on this point, so agreed totally with that. The concern I have is that the DSG deficits are not eradicated and therefore they stay sitting on the balance sheet and growing whilst the new regime comes in that fixes the problem, the debts still go up. And I completely agree, the charging the interest to the GSG deficit fixes nothing really, apart from one really small, more than anomaly, which is the council taxpayer are currently paying for the debt, and that's completely at odds with the intention of DSG send, and against, it seems to be in contradiction with the statutory override that puts the deficit off balance sheet, yet the council taxpayer will not feel it's off balance sheet as they pay the interest.
I guess we're also going to have to wait until the next, when's the white paper due out that will give us some degree of...
Well,
November.
we're going to have a
Whatever.
lovely Christmas, because this is when we will get the final judgment on where we are with our government support, but also at the very same time, the government's proposing to announce its intentions on the DSG.
I guess the only saving grace for any council, if there is a saving grace for any council, is that every council faces. This is cataclysmic, and if it's forced to go back on book, and we have to fully account, if every council in the country has to fully account for the capital and the repayment, then every council in the country would go
I
bankrupt.
think half the counties in the country, maybe more, would fail. It just had to come back.
I
on
would
book.
think
So
it
we
would be
had to pay this off.
significantly more. Anyway, not to be fixed tonight, but Mary Louise.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry. I mean, every time I think about the DSG, I kind of get this panic attack. And because it feels like we're kind of, Wile E. Coyote, the moment that he runs off the cliff and his little legs are still running because he believes that he can still make it, but, it's an inevitable fall. I wanted to ask, in relation to the sort of like the school white paper, there has been talk about just like writing it off, that we have got ourselves into such a catastrophic mess. And I just wanted to ask, what in terms of Wokingham would that mean?
Okay, it's, well, first of all, I caveat my response in that I don't know what, if there was a writing, what that would mean. Does it mean the whole debt disappears and is passported to the Treasury? But let's say it is that one.
Essentially, that's what was being discussed.
Okay, so let's take it that scenario where the current debt on our books is simply picked up by the Treasury. So that would mean, so we got a forecast of £56 million deficit. So yeah, we're getting questions all over the place. Right. So that means the government pick up that. So under that scenario, the government would send us £56 million. So that would help us in many ways. So that would wipe that deficit out, but then and it would alleviate or let's say take away all of the debt funding pressure that we're currently funding, so about £2 million per annum we're at, so it will give us about £2 million would be better off from a council taxpayer's perspective. And we would also be less, we would be able to take a higher risk around our other reserves because we're not as worried about this runaway train. It would be fantastic if that happened. Sorry, I'm only speaking from Woking and Borough Council's perspective because they're the ones who pay me. So, yes, that would be great. But then there's the issue of, is the system properly adjusted, amended, so that we don't all land back in the same position?
That was essentially the point I was going to make, that wiping the slate clean would be wonderful, but unless something's done to address the cause of that deficit building up, all we'd be doing is going back to zero and then building up again. So if you could swing it with the government to wipe the slate clean and do the radical reform.
We're talking about sort of like what's possible, as we've said. I mean, like, it's very clear that all councils will fall over if it is not addressed. And, you know, there are different ways, there are different sort of, you know, things thought about as to how to address it. But that there is one argument for just saying a kind of total, you know, end. But I just wanted to know what, in terms of Wokingham, that would mean.
Susan, and then Pauline, and then we'll try and move forward.
I think that what is positive is that the council has invested in the SEND team, so that's positive. It's been positive that we've been part of Safety Valve, so we are having an impact. Although, of course, the demand is still great, and I think that one of the concerns with the white paper is that it's just not going to go far enough as to what's actually needed to really address the challenges that councils actually have. So something that really needs to happen is that the legislation or the white paper needs to be very clear on accountability, and accountability held by health, held by schools, and held by the local authority. Because at the moment, where there are disputes, it's the local authority that can be left carrying the can. Yes, yeah, that's correct. And of course, what's happening at the moment is because there's a delay in the changes, it's also causing a real anxiety with parents as well. And so there's a lot of anxiety in the system. So we need change in the white paper, and it needs to be far-reaching. And it needs to be very precise, I'd say. And for example, something the government's talking about is putting pupils with SEND being more in mainstream schools. So, but for that to work, there needs to be the appropriate level of training and support for teachers to enable that to happen, because that would be broadly 5 to 6 pupils in every class with SEN. So it's that if it's mainstream, that would need to happen. So there's a lot. There is a lot there to actually tackle this.
And just before we go to Pauline, I think my fear, as the parent of a SEND child as well, is the white paper, when it comes out, will be not detailed enough, not far-reaching enough, and it will just kick the can down the road for another 3, 4, 5 years without giving the answers. I'm not wanting to rat hole on one particular topic about SEND policy, because I'll get on my hobby horse, but this is a failure of successive decades of, going back to the 2014 legislation and beyond, but we failed to deal with SEND in this country. And the idea of, when I listen to colleagues and peers of mine that are educators at all levels of it, even the safety valve scheme, which was a scheme that was designed to put in place a safety valve for all the councils, just as a stopgap measure actually is having significant detrimental impact on the rest of the schools because of the way that some of the top slicing of budgets is happening in other areas. It's not, we're not going to get onto this tonight, although we are. It is a massive issue. I think we all wait to see with bated breath, but with not much hope that the white paper will give some degree of direction for the future. I'm not trying to make a political point, but we have to deal with the DSG as we have it now, the deficits that we face it now, with the uncertainty that brings. So I think it's a headache that's not going to go away. And even if it comes out with a nirvana position of writing out the entire debt and stopping it rebuilding again, it's going to be years before we start to see that in practical terms. And my fear is the white paper, as you say, Susan, isn't going to go far enough. It's not going to give us the clarity. And if we do get the ability just to transfer some of the debt back to Treasury, it's just going to reset the clock to zero. It doesn't make the problem go away. Pauline, sorry.
Sorry, one final point on SEND before I go off it. I can't remember, I'm trying to remember my figures, but this problem has appeared over 5 or 6 years. It is relatively fast growing, isn't it? It's in terms of a significant figure. I remember I went back through the reserves and graphed them all, and I thought, I can't remember what the date is, so maybe I should be asking Graham. It started off around about 1 or 2 million and went like that very quickly. Is that right? Or am I misremembering? It may not be 5 years, but I'm not trying to make a 5-year point. I'm just interested.
No, it probably isn't a lot longer than 5 years, and it was for quite a period of time. It's like a doubling.
Yeah.
So I think it started like 250,000, then
like cancer.
500,000, then a million, then yeah. So if you look at it is quite alarming if you look at the year-on-year growth, and there are a number of years where it just doubles.
Yeah, my recollection was maybe about 5 years ago. It was there, but it was quite insignificant in terms of the finances of the council. So that wasn't the point I was going to make. So you're right, but it only gives you a very small amount of breathing space because it'll start doubling again. The question was about SIL and 106, the reserves that are not in here, which are all the money that we hold from SIL 106 payments. I don't know, where do they sit? Are they? How much are they and where are they? Or are they held by the developers until we spend it?
This is a list of revenue reserves. So that's the intention of the paper, because revenue reserves are a consideration could be a consideration in the MTFP. There's also a list of capital reserves, but that will be extending this paper considerably.
Can you give me a scale for them, and do we get the interest on it?
I can't give you a scale. Obviously, they would be in the balance sheet. And those reserves are used prior to being used on the schemes. They are used either as cash that we invest externally to create external income investment returns, and that's reported in our KPIs, or they're used in lieu of borrowing, so they help guard us.
Internal borrowing?
Correct.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That's a little bit of a jigsaw just dropped into place. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Just a small point on SIL, Pauline. Obviously, SIL is subject to an allocation to town and parish councils. If they automatically get 15%. If they have an adopted neighbourhood plan, they get 25%. So we don't get all of the SIL receipts that are collected from developers. It's also important to remember that SIL payments start coming in as houses are completed. If we want to get infrastructure in advance, we have to forward fund it. We have to borrow in anticipation of SIL receipts. So SIL is a really double-edged sword for us. Section 106 provides a legal obligation on developers to actually provide the infrastructure themselves, to pay for it themselves. So we have to strike the right balance between these two methods of securing developer contributions. Sill was very fashionable for a while. I think Sill's downside is now more apparent, and I think there's going to be, certainly in the new local plan and its primary development site, there'll be more of an emphasis on section 106.
It's really interesting. Do we have the choice then?
Well, we can obviously, we do have some choice, yeah, we do have an element of choice.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to come back on the reason for the growth in the deficit and why it's happened how it has happened. So since the 2014 legislation, there's been a right to ask for EHCP by parents. So that, and then the parents have, they've lost trust in what can be delivered in terms of in different areas around SEN. So the EHCPs have grown and grown over the years since the legislation, but in the early years, boroughs have had sufficiency in their own areas to actually meet those needs. But what's actually happened as the number of EHCPs have grown and grown and grown, the sufficiency has not kept pace with the number of EHCPs. And what's actually happened is the money that's being spent now, a not insignificant proportion, is on independent specialist provision. And that is far more expensive than what can be provided locally. And that's what's really driving the overspend. So it's basically private profits. And so it's how we change from actually that private profit to putting more in the early stages. So that is the real sort of challenge. And that also affects the homeschool transport costs as well, because the independent specialist provision can be out of borough, and so you've got your homeschool transport costs. So that's sort of how it's actually driven the increased costing.
Mary Louise, thank you, and then we'll move on.
I think we have almost moved on, because I was going to raise exactly that issue about the sort of, I think in relation to the school paper, we're asking a lot of it to solve this kind of structural, nightmarish financial situation where there is this deficit which seems to kind of grow, we won't say exponentially because that's too frightening, but it grow at an enormous rate. And the nature of SEN provision, and I agree completely with your analysis, but I think that those two have to be separated slightly in the sense that, it has been allowed to develop that there is now this looming deficit which threatens like the nature of local government. And there is a massive problem in our SEN provision, and they don't necessarily have to be solved in the same paper at the same time. I mean, they have to be recognised as linked, as you say, but they don't necessarily have to be answered everything in that paper.
I think what may have helped, for example, in Wokingham, is the 2 SEN schools. So we were due to get 2 SEN schools, and that has had a big financial impact. The fact that is not happened, and it's not clear whether that is going to happen. So that's a very much a practical thing that would have helped.
I'm going to attempt to move us on. Are there any other questions on the reserves in general?
I've just got a quick one. I think it might be a typo, but building control on page 54. It's got an increase of 50k, but the estimated balance is just 10,000. So I think one of those has to be typo, and I think it's the change. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I saw that as well. Can we get that tidied up for? Yes. Otherwise, it's one of those. Yeah, can we get that picked up for when we look at the, or just get that corrected rather?
Yes.
Looks like a typo or a zero missing somewhere.
Yes, we'll get it corrected.
Thank you. Right. In which case, if there's nothing else on this item, we will move on. But can I just, on behalf of all of us here, say a massive thank you to Graham, and to Susan and to Imogen and Stephen for their support, the two of them for the supporting roles, but this has been the Graham show tonight. Graham, as ever, thank you for the way in which you've answered all of the questions, some of which have been more curveball than others. I'd like to thank you for that. There's a number of questions that have come up tonight. There's a number of points to clarify, I think, that we just need to get picked up, which we'll see in a summary. But I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us here tonight, thank you for the work that's been done in getting us to the all of the paperwork tonight. I'm saying that to kind of, because I know we have a few more meetings to go where there'll be more detail, but I just wanted to thank you for the questions, thank you for the all the answers that you've given, and Susan as well for the work that you've done on sort of across the council in all of this. I think it's really important to note that whilst the number of 50 million is a terrifying number, it's reassuring that to hear from the leader, from Stephen and from Graham and from Susan about the work that's being done, and I look forward to hearing the next round of all of the information over the subsequent weeks and months as we go through the next proposals and waiting for more clarity from government. If you'd like to stay for the remaining 2 items, you are more than welcome. If not, we might finish them before you've managed to leave the room. But thank you very much. And we'll move on. Item 9. I was half joking, but Graham's exit was swift. That was a swift exit by Graham. Wow. Right, agenda item 9 is the work programme, which there's a subsequent paper that's been handed out. If you haven't got it, there's one on the table over there. This just reflects some of the changes that have been made over the last week or so. I referenced it in the management committee. We've just moved around a few things. There's a few things that we've moved out just to ensure that sufficient time is given for all of the items on the agenda for the financial planning. Any questions on the work programme? No. Come.
Is there really nothing on the MTFP until November? So we've got all sorts of other stuff on October and the 4th of November. Oh, 4th of November, yeah. So there's nothing on October. Surprised. As far as I can see. Yeah. No, I understand that. I'm just surprised there's quite a large gap. But if that's when it's going to be, that's when it's going to be. Okay, fair enough.
One meeting in between.
Okay.
And in part, it has enabled us also, with us starting in a couple of weeks, to get those other important items through, especially the speed limit policy, on the next meeting, or the one for the 29th. Any more questions? No? Okay, in which case we'll move on. And then the final item on the agenda is the action tracker. Any comments on 67 or 68 of the pack? Nope. Okay. In which case, thank you very much indeed. Meeting closed.